Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another SAEON Science Seminar. This is now around our 30th. I think this is our 31st or maybe 32nd SAEON Seminar. So we're still going well. And today is a bit different because I think it's for the first time that our speaker is not a SAEON staff or student, but actually a SAEON research associate. And this was a decision we made a few months ago to try and broaden our speakers to include a broader range of our stakeholders, especially our research associates. So our talk this morning is by Professor James Blignaut. And James works primarily for an NGO called Asset Research, which is focused on restoration and particularly the economics of restoration. James is also unusual for our speakers in that his career started at the South African Revenue Service many years ago. So I don't think we've ever had a speaker from SARS. Fortunately, he's not speaking on behalf of SARS today. He's speaking on recent research he's been doing in collaboration with SAEON. James's association with SAEON actually goes way back, I think to 2012 or even before, when he started working with the Fynbos node on restoration projects in the Karoo, and then later got involved with our DIA NRM funded projects from 2016 onwards. And the most recent round of that has been work that James and his colleagues at Asset have done on the economics of restoration at a national scale. And that's what he's going to be talking on today. And he's also involved with SAEON through at the Grasslands, Wetlands and Forest node through a project there in the Mukutaland area. And also they've been involved with a study on economics of ecosystem services in Algoa Bay more recently. And James is joined this morning by his colleague Rozanne, who also works for Asset. And she's been involved in this project I'll be talking on this morning for the past 3 years, and actually for 3 years before that. And she's currently a research fellow at Nelson Mandela University and involved in that Algoa Bay project. All right, so let me hand over to James. Thanks, James.
Thank you very much, Tony. I do appreciate this opportunity that you and the colleagues at SAEON has offered us to share some of the ideas on the economics of restoration. Yes, as you have said, I'm joined by Rozanne and many of the team members have also joined, and I will briefly introduce them shortly. I'm going to switch off my video while I'm going to do this talk just to save some bandwidth, and then hopefully you can still see the screen as we proceed. Tony, right off the bat, I just would like to thank you as well and the colleagues at SAEON for administering this project. And it has been a fabulous journey that started quite a few years ago, as you have rightly pointed out, and hopefully will stretch into the future likewise. So what I'm going to talk about together with Rozanne and the team is the economics of restoration, looking back at the historic evidence while glancing forward. And perhaps if I may ask if the colleagues who have joined us could perhaps mute their computers, it will help to reduce the background noise. This project is funded by the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, the NRM project, Natural Resource Management project, especially then working for water, and in consultation and in conjunction with NRF and SAEON specifically, with Tony as the project manager. And hence also sincere gratitude to both the funder and as well as the people who have actually made it possible through SAEON, and it has been a good partnership ongoing. And as Tony has said, this is the second sort of tranche, a 3-year tranche. It was on the back of a 3-year project that was 2016 to 2018, and then this final 3 years that concluded in February of this year, to look at the economics of restoration. So what are we going to talk about? Well, the structure is I'm going to give a brief introduction to Asset, focus then on the focus of the study, what we concentrated on, the topics. And then the bulk of the presentation is going to be on the cost and the benefits of restoration, both reflecting back in terms of the database that's been developed and the benefit cost analysis. And point 4, the benefits of restoration glancing forward, which is then the part that colleague Rozanne Bester is going to talk about. So in terms of asset research, we are a not-for-profit company, as Tony has said, public benefit organization that focuses on the development of capacity and research in the field of environmental resource economics. We established it in 2006 when we realized that there's a big gap, a big need for this kind of services and expertise in environmental resource economics. And therefore we offer scholarships, internships, short courses, colloquiums, and added learning opportunities. And in doing so, we are per definition not a consultancy company. We work with, all the projects are with and through students or interns in conjunction with a team of other people. Because we believe in collaboration and not in competition. The world is, and the research needs are enormous. And therefore, by developing capacity that's much needed, we can expand the frontiers of the science, but we also can develop that in a way that develop human resources across the board. And therefore, we partner with a range of industry companies, industry trusts, Restore Africa Funds, Integra Trust, the Maize Trust, Milk South Africa, internationally with the Ecological Health Network, universities, and then obviously also government and research organizations like SAEON. So, what did we do in this project specifically? The objective was to develop an open access, nationwide, economy environment systems dynamic model to inform land management decisions in a manner that develops capacity. That's basically what we were briefed to do. So the brief was develop a model which will allow users all over the world, wherever they are, but mostly in South Africa, to populate an online model with site-specific parameters, and thereby, by populating it with site-specific parameters, get an estimate of what the benefit-cost ratio would be of the restoration of that specific project. And do so in a manner that develops capacity as well in and through the process. So that when you have developed that model, that the decision support system is available, that it can inform management decisions. And those management decisions could be to prioritize restoration, site A, site B, site C. It can also assist in how the restoration should be done. In the different types of interventions that can be done, as well as the cost profiles of those interventions. It can also tell you about what would be the benefits coming from that specific restoration initiative, provided that you provide it with the required parameters. In order to do that, however, required a team. And as I've mentioned, the project team was managed by Rozanne, who's going to talk about the modeling work specifically, but then also Kulukazi, Luleka, Pablo, Matt, Humna, and Tafatswa. So all of them have been able to register for various different degrees and have also graduated during the process and have been actively involved in the development of the various bits and pieces thereof. And it has been an enormous achievement by all of them, and I would like to acknowledge what they have been able to achieve. Taking into account that by far the bulk of this project happened during a period of absolute lockdown, and we're forced to work in the virtual world that we are in now. And so the project had to also make that transition. And I would like to commend the achievements of the team today. The project comprised 13 deliverables. I'm not going to run through all of them, just the 2 that's on the screen. Deliverable H spoke about a database that in terms of what has been done in terms of the field of the economics of restoration in time past. That's the glancing back part of the title that I've mentioned earlier. And in that process, we had to look at developing a database of papers in terms of the benefits and the cost of restoration that has been published so that we can have a point of departure that's based in science and based in the current evidence and the knowledge that we have. Then using that information in terms of what we've got based on the scientific evidence in the past, focus on the development of the model that I spoke of earlier, the decision support system, and have then the models online available. These 2 were the 2 big deliverables, with all the other deliverables basically leading up to them. I'm going to speak mostly about the deliverable 8 component, the database, and what emerged from the database, and Rozanne then around deliverable 13 and the model. So, the cost and benefits of restoration. Let's look back and the evidence from the meta-analysis that we have completed. So it's not the first meta-analysis that's been done in the country. There's been a whole string of meta-analyses that's been done over the last number of years that has different focus points, focus areas of focus, covered various different years, but most of them are starting to get a bit dated, with 2018 being the latest, but it went back as far as 1994. And it has got, while there are a large number of studies in them, they would by no means encompassing of all the different studies that has dealt with the economics of restoration. They were different subsets that was developed for that specific purpose of that specific paper and or report. So what did we do which was different in this project? We review all the relevant available peer-reviewed papers pertaining to the cost and benefits of restoration up to the end of 2020. So just bear in mind that obviously since 2021, 2022, more papers would have come online and been available. And that obviously can be included later in the database. But we had to put a line in the sand in terms of where we will stop with the data, with the search. And that was the end of 2020. And the method or the approach that we took comprised 3 stages. We sourced all peer-reviewed papers that we could find using keywords that we've used in an earlier paper that focused on a global assessment that was used within the TEEP process. Through then, that's looking at economics of restoration and ecosystems and restoration in various different permutations. But we used the same one that we've used in the past from a consistency perspective. Then, given the results that we have achieved from this process, we were able to highlight who the authors are that has contributed to those papers. We then started to engage with them and shared with them a draft of the database and asked them to populate the database for us and to enrich it with additional papers from their own internal resources. And then what we did is to look through all of those papers that we have received and identify the papers suitable for the quantitative database. So which papers are actually dealing with the rands and cents of the restoration. So the criteria for the inclusion in the database, it must be essay or essay-based studies. So it could be a study that's published internationally or have other papers in and references to other studies in, but there must be a South African study in there. It must comply to the definition of ecological restoration as per SIR 2002. The definition that the Society for Ecological Restoration has for restoration. It had to either elaborate on the qualitative aspects of the economics of restoration or provide us with a quantification thereof. And both were then documented. But we also had to, or it must be able to reference what those specific benefits and costs are, and it needed to quantify that in a great deal of detail for us. Lastly, it had to describe how the restoration benefited either the ecosystem health, the functioning integrity, or benefited people in general. So, given this criteria and then how we search for the different papers, we were able to compile a database of 177 peer-reviewed papers, of which 142 were contained quantitative data. That was together with grey literature, websites, and project information that was sourced in the process and during the course of the big hunt for documents, all was combined into a database, in an Excel database, that's downloadable from this specific URL that is on the screen. That became then the big database from which we then were able to start the actual quantitative analysis in terms of what the benefits and the cost of restoration is. But having gone through all this work of compiling the database, meticulously hunting through all of them for the different values and also identifying the specific ecosystem services, we then also plot them on spatially. So the spatial distribution of the specific of those studies have then put into a GIS database. That GIS database is then accessible through the link at the bottom, where you can then actually see in which areas the various studies are. What we've done is we have categorized the studies in terms of biodiversity benefits, water benefits, carbon benefits, benefits for agriculture, benefits for urban environment, etc. I'm going to share one snapshot of the one for water benefits. So this is how the map would look like then for water benefits, where each one of these little droplets represents a specific study. If you then click on that specific droplet, then there will be a pop-up box, and that pop-up box will then provide you with information about that specific study. The longitude, as well as the paper number in the database, in the Excel database, with then a hyperlink to the actual study itself, so that one then can have a quick access to that specific paper which you then are looking for. And I've just selected that specific one for this example down near Durban. This spatial representation of where the restoration has been, as well as what the benefits are, provides us also with the ability to say, but where are the gaps? And why are the gaps there? For example, we can see there are quite a few studies in the Western Cape, in the Southern Cape, but there's quite a lot of vacant area in the Limpopo area, and obviously also here in the Karoo. And dare I say, it's from the water benefit side, it's actually a pity because water is extremely scarce there and should actually have more studies there than only the random one or two. Moving on then from the spatial representation of the database, then dealing with the actual rand and cents thereof. The cost numbers are usually readily available. The cost of restoration, how much does it cost? Most people and most studies are very much sensitive to the cost side, and it is usually either from an engineering assessment or from an accounting process that you will know what the costs are. And the majority of the recorded costs are for the operating costs. When it deals with the benefits, it's far harder and much more difficult to estimate since it requires an ecosystem service valuation process. And also, there's a range of ecosystem service benefits that one can get. Can get water benefits, biodiversity benefits, carbon benefits, food provisioning, and refugia services, etc., etc. So it's basically layered. Whereas from a cost side, you've got labor cost, equipment cost, management cost. There are a couple of line items that you need to consider. But from a benefit side, the benefits are layered and it has to be identified and then have to be valued, which makes it much, much harder. But the way that we have done it is again in like manner with how it has been done internationally in the past in 2013, 14, and 15 by 3 other studies that has been conducted, again to be comparable with how it has been done elsewhere. What is different, however, is that in this specific study, and the major improvement, I think, in this study, is that we have, instead of working with means and standard deviations, we have gone beyond that to include also the quartiles, quartile 1, 2, 3, and 4. With the quartile 1 referring to the bottom 25% of values, quartile 2 referring to the second quarter of values, and quartile 3, the third, and quartile 4, the top quartile, the top 25% of values, in order to give us a shape of how the values differ because of the very much asymmetric nature of the values. And I'll share that in a second. So this provides us with a summary of the benefits and costs for all ecosystems where the number of studies were 4 and bigger. We've excluded the ecosystems with a lower number of papers than 4. First thing that I wanted to highlight is the standard deviation compared then to the means are enormous. Basically meaning that the means are not of much use given the standard deviations, both for the benefits as well as for the costs of restoration. This is because of the relatively small number of studies. We started with an N of 4 and higher, as I've said, but we definitely need many more studies for each of the ecosystems in order to reduce the standard deviation. Secondly, why the standard deviation is so broad is because of the different types of costs that has been included for the different studies, as well as the recording methods, but also the different types of benefits that has been recorded. There's no standardization in terms of how the costs and how the benefits are recorded, giving rise to a broad range. Hence also then the focus on the quartiles 1, 2, 3, and 4, the lower quarter of values, the mid quarter of values, and then the upper quarter of values, in order to provide us with that spectrum and even the asymmetric nature of the values. What I would like to highlight is the enormous values for rivers and water bodies, both in terms of the cost and benefits on quartile 4. I have to mention, however, that quartile 4 does represent the upper 25%, the higher end of the specific values. But the water bodies and rivers are by far the biggest numbers, both in terms of cost and benefits. What is also interesting is the deviation between quartile 3 and quartile 4 on most of the ecosystems. 7,500 going to 33,000. So there's a big jump in the benefits going from the third quartile to the last quartile, meaning that as you go to the top end of the values, there's a big jump in both the benefits as well as in the costs for the inclusion of more costs as well as the inclusion of more benefits. And I'll go to talk about that in the next slide as well. But it is very clear that the big difference between the different quartiles, especially from a benefit side, is the number of benefits that's been included in the study. The studies that have reported the lower end of the quartiles have only included 1 or 2 ecosystem service benefits, whereas the studies that have included under quartile 4 have included a spectrum or a suite of ecosystem services. So the more ecosystem services that are getting measured and valued, naturally you will end up with a higher level of a higher value and move you to the higher quartile. So the question now, given what I've just said, is what is the relationship between the benefits in quartile for quartile 1 compared then to quartile 4? So under the quartile 1, which is our lower end of values, we see that the benefit cost ratio improves, and quite significantly so, when you move to quartile 4 for the bulk of the ecosystems, which basically means that proportionately the benefits at the top end much more proportionately than the cost, except for thicket and fynbos, where the cost of restoring the last little bit of thicket and the last little bit of fynbos is more than what is added in terms of the benefits. However, if you look at the numbers, thicket still is hugely beneficial at the benefit cost ratio of 5:1. So 5 Rand benefit to 1 Rand cost, whereas fynbos is really struggling. And it is quite expensive, and it's very difficult to get the fynbos to really work, or this in terms of the benefit cost ratios. It doesn't matter to which quartile one is looking at. But for the most of the ecosystems, the ratio improves as we go from quartile 1 to quartile 4, meaning that the more ecosystem services we are including, the bigger the benefits are, and then relatively speaking, the benefit to cost relationship improves, and quite markedly so. But what I've just shared was a static analysis. But we know that the economics of restoration is not static. You normally have high upfront costs that then goes down over time and then levels out with some kind of a management cost over time. Whereas the benefits has got the opposite slope. It starts off low and then it goes up, and then it reaches an asymptote where it has reached its maximum. So in a dynamic sense, you've got a downside initially where you have to make the investment in restoration, and an upside later on. And so we have to look at it in a dynamic sense as well, not just in a static sense. A static sense is not going to help us in making management decisions. So what we did is then to compile a small benefit cost model taking into consideration this dynamic effects. This has been also then documented in a paper that has been recently published with the URL that is documented there on the screen. And it is this dynamic values that Rozanne has then taken and the team into the systems dynamic model to assist us with decision making in other areas as well. But let me just share a couple of slides on the result of this dynamic analysis that we did. So based on the previous studies, we calculated the net present value and the internal rate of return of restoration by using the values from the studies that we have just mentioned, using a discount rate of 7% and a term of 25 years. We have this upfront restoration cost, this big expense, this big investment initially, tapering down, and then with a 5% maintenance cost for the rest of the period. The benefit starts low. It starts at the 20% of the benefit level. It then increases over a 5-year period, and then it stabilizes. And then we compare the benefits and the cost with each other in this dynamic context. What I'm going to show you is in the next slide is where we compare the benefits of quartile 1 with the cost of quartile 1, as well as for the other quartiles. Taking a full note thereof that a variety of different mixes are possible in reality. In reality, you can have the quartile 1 cost with quartile 4 benefits, which will obviously give you the biggest benefit margin. Or you can have a quartile 4 cost with quartile 1 benefits, which will give you the biggest cost margin. Those would be different permutations that one can do to show the full range. But what I'm going to share with you now is just where we've compared quartile 1 costs with quartile 1 benefits and 2, 3, and 4, given a discount rate of 7% over the 25-year period. Again, we did this for all the ecosystems where the number of studies bigger 4 or bigger. What is some of the salient points that came from this? That for fynbos, we really struggled to find a positive return. And I haste to say, don't kill the messenger. If you don't like those negative numbers there, it's basically just an incentive to do more research on that specific topic going forward. We are only documenting the work that has been done in the past. Likewise for grasslands, for the lower quartiles, but for the 4th quartile, the benefit is enormous. The almost 500,000 rand that sits there over a 25-year period. And then at the very lowest quartile, then succulent karoo is also negative. But what is clear, and is highlighted by the green ovals, is the big differences between quartiles 3 and 4. Emphasizing the point that I've made earlier, that as we go to the quartile 4 benefits, including a larger range of benefits in the mix, then you do see quite a jump in the benefits to realize. Is it possible to always quantify all the benefits? Probably not. So one cannot use quartile 4 as your benchmark because that is the upper end in terms of, and assuming that you can actually value all the benefits and all the services. But but if you are able to do that, then the benefits of restoration is significant. As I've mentioned, a variety of different permutations is possible. Here we've just compared quartile 1 cost with quartile 1 benefits, and likewise for the other quartiles, but the other permutations are also possible. So the benefits, the variation in the data is the result of the fact that the data is made of different data sets, different authors, different papers, different methods that's been used that has added to the variation in the data, but add also the number of studies that's included. In terms of the cost, the variation is different, is linked to the fact that there are different types of interventions been used and different types of cost that's been reported, as well as geospatial reasons. It's often just simply more costly to restore at site A than site B for geospatial reasons. But lastly, then in summary, the higher quintile cost, the most expensive intervention types, or the most difficult locations. So those would be the areas in high mountainous areas or where you really have got very expensive methods of restoration. But the higher quartile benefits are studies that's actually been much more comprehensive in estimating the benefit sets. With that in mind, however, I'm going to hand over to Rozanne to take us forward, taking this information in developing an online system dynamic model to assist in land management decision making. Rozanne, over to you.
Hello. So we're going to look at the initiative to develop these systems dynamics models. Can you please go to the next slide? Thank you. So the project's actual objective was to build these sort of open access models that allow you to sort of see what the cost and benefit of restoration is for certain projects. So what we did is we chose invasive alien plant removal as a case study to start with, because different types of restoration have different dynamics to it. So we thought that we could get a pretty good grasp of the dynamics involved in removing invasive alien plants, as we had a lot of friends who could give us some insight into the administrative complexities of that process and the actual mechanics of it. So we focused on invasive alien plant clearing. Next slide, please. And then we engaged heavily with our friends. We went through a sort of an iterative modeling stakeholder engagement process where we would come up with conceptual designs of a model and present it to DFFE. And Andrew, at that time, Christopher was heavily involved in giving us feedback. We then came up with more prototypes, and we went back to our stakeholders, and we extended the list of stakeholders. We eventually took our conceptual models to conferences as well, and we eventually ended up with 3 different types of models. What we found out was that at each there are different scales at which this restoration problem of invasive alien plants have different dynamics and have different focal points. We ended up with a sort of a project model, which only looked at the immediate clearing processes and looking at the problem with contractors and efficiencies. And we end up with a regional systems dynamics model. This is what DFFE was very interested in, because they don't actually have a regional model. They've got a very sophisticated project scale model, and they have sort of a very sophisticated Excel national scale model. But the regional space for understanding the dynamics that involved clearing regions, in our case, we looked at catchments. That was an interesting problem for the funder. So we also decided we were going to spend some time with that. But we found at each one of these 3 scales, so now we have the project, the regional, and the national, we found that the dynamics were completely different. At the national scale, it's the norm to take averages and to use averages and to understand things as averages, and also makes sense given the size of the operation. At a project scale, like you had fine data, very specific data, going down to the type of invasive species you had. So we then decided we were going to build these 3 systems dynamics models, because it would be impossible to build a model at a national scale that could help project managers, or that could be useful for somebody looking at clearing their land plots, wanting to know what the costs and benefits might be. And it would also be very frustrating to have, if somebody were interested in looking at the bigger picture, perhaps at a catchment scale, maybe, or at the national scale, they also wouldn't be able to use that, that model. So this is just the process. We had a stakeholder engagement iterative modeling process. We ended up conceptualizing 3 systems dynamics models. I'm now going to only speak about 2 of them, because the regional scale model is proving rather difficult to make useful. So this is the interface. We have already finished the model. We've uploaded it. I have chosen not to speak about this, the causal loop diagrams and the stock flow structures of the model. I'm just going to show you the final product. So this is a very nice user-friendly kind of interface where you can go to this Forio website, you can use this model, and you can look at restoring a certain plot of land. Here you can, at the project scale, you can talk about how big the land is that you're looking at restoring, how much of the land is invaded. It allows you in subsequent tabs to talk about the nature of the type of invasion. So it goes down to the species level and an estimate of the percentages of that. And then we can we can sort of run some kind of using our data, we can run some kind of an estimate of what the costs and benefits of restoring this piece of land or clearing the invasives would be. Here I just made an example for some size land with some extent of invasion. As a baseline is the yellow line, so you can run something like this, and then you can run some scenarios. What if you increase the follow-up frequency? What would happen? This is the blue line. Or what if you doubled the budget that you're going to spend in this area? And you can sort of see what that impact would be. So this is the sort of usability that I thought I could demonstrate. At the time, I didn't know what my load shedding sort of situation would be like. So of course, it would have been better if I could demonstrate this live. But this should give you some kind of a understanding of the functionality that it can do. You will see to the far right at the top, the graph is negative, the net present value of benefits. This is because we're only looking at this project over a 5-year period. And this goes back to the scaling problem we had. We were told by the people at DFFE that projects, the kind of time horizons of project managers that run clearing operations were very short. So they wouldn't really be interested or even a landowner wouldn't really be interested in having an extended 30-year clearing process. They sort of want to get things done and move on. So because of that very short time horizon, which only goes up to 5 years in this project scale model, you see that the net present values are negative, which means that it will cost more. This is just because the costs of clearing exceed the benefits that you immediately reap. The benefits in clearing invasive alien plants, as Prof. James has shown, they only really kick in a couple of years later, once the land, however you classify restoration, is restored. I will say this, we bumped a lot of heads, especially with our esteemed ecologist colleagues who felt very uncomfortable with this model, because the idea of removing an invader is not really restoring, and the terminology might be wrong. And there's this entire debate around what to do after you clear the invaders. So just saying that's all in there. But we have settled on some terminology which we've changed. And yeah, so this is the project scale model. I just thought I'd demonstrate sort of how it works and what it looks like. It's very usable. You can just change the sliders, and the national scale model is on the same open source platform. So for this national scale model, it's the entire country. So it's invasive alien plant clearing across the entire country. And the parameters that you get to change here are different. The thing that we modeled was, we modeled things like, on average, how efficiently do people clear? On average, how what is the regrowth after clearing on average? And one of the big things that we tried to model here is we wanted to do projections with this model, because we want people to project forward. So we got historical data of the Working for Water program from Andrew Vanneberg, and then we calibrated the model so that at least in back testing, it could at least tell mask very closely or trace very closely what happened historically. So that's the sort of validation of the model. We also then validated it with the Working for Water people quite extensively, and they were happy with it. This allows you to do something like this. You can ask a question, okay, well, what is the total value of the Working for Water project historically? Or what would it be going forward given certain economic conditions or given certain political conditions? Because one can sort of change the factors that would affect budget, both the budget allocated by the public sector and the private sector. And then you can sort of, however you want to say a model is valid, you can sort of guess what it would be going forward. So in this, you could draw graphs like this. This is an example of what one can do. One can say, okay, well, what is the baseline? So the baseline is, this is now the value of ecosystem services and it's in like, it's a lot of money. it's in a lot of money. On the, look at the vertical axis, that's in million rand. So this is a lot of money. This is what's the total for South Africa, the estimate of ecosystem goods and services under 3 different scenarios. The baseline scenario is the current scenario that we're in, with the history of the Working for Water project being what it was. And it's sort of supposed to tell you that, it's sort of supposed to tell you what the value was. So the blue area, that sort of tells you what the value was of ecosystem goods and services that you would have potentially lost. But I have not explained this very well. So in the model, we had to differentiate between what landowners do. So you have owner actions where they actually go about looking after their land. And we had to measure that and sort of calibrate the model for that. And we did this using expert opinion. We asked Dr. Christian Murray. He actually came and sat with us to help us understand the extent that landowners have actually started engaging with their land and the invasions on their land. So the green line represents the kind of scenario where you remove landowner intervention and state intervention. Hopefully we'll be able to one day write a manuscript about this where we discuss how we calibrated this, because it is quite a strong assumption to make, where you can sort of remove the actions of landowners in preventing invasion on their land. So that is a rough estimate of the example of this model. And it might be one of the greatest weaknesses to know the extent to which landowners themselves actually have kept the lid on invasions. We don't really know, but we did our best with expert consultancy to try and understand that. And then the blue is sort of the scenario of, what if there was no actual clearing, which is a lot easier to do, because there have been very clever people in the past who have made similar estimates of the rate at which invasions will spread if there were no intervention. I haven't put a graph here comparing previous studies that have done this to what we have gotten, but that's sort of what we did. And the baseline is the situation in which what we currently have, which is where we have the landowner intervention, and we also have the clearing. So that is this graph. It's probably a bit messy to make all of these assumptions, but you have to do it when you do these kinds of models. So the area that is blue would be the what we have won in terms of ecosystem goods and services due to landowner action and just due to the clearing. Yes, so that's it. Yeah. Next slide, please. I think this is all. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Rozanne. Thank you, Tony and colleagues. The models are available online, the database available online, and a last word from my side is just to thank Tony and SAEON again for the collaborative agreement that we have had, and that we were able to work on this in such a way. Thank you, Tony.
Okay, thanks, James and Rozanne, for that talk. Very interesting. If anyone has a question, please just unmute yourself and ask, or put up your hand, or you can write it into the chat if you prefer. So, James, we've got a lot of there's a lot of emphasis now coming from the National Research Foundation on societal impact of research, and so that makes this type of thing very interesting to us. And I have a question on that. When you're engaging, I suppose your primary pathway for getting these results out and having impact is through DFFE. So how do your engagements with them work when you've got your results from your model or whatever and you want to take it to them? How would you do that, and who do you connect with there? James, hang on, you're still muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Tony. So yes, we have our point person, Andrew Vandenberg, and his colleagues at the department, and so they have actually given us quite a bit of their time during the past 3 years. As Rozanne has also mentioned, in workshopping the details of the various models and making sure that it is speaking to their specific requirements. And as a result, which was originally planned to develop one model, that is what stood in the terms of reference, build one model, eventually became 3 models because of the need from the client, but also because of the impossibility of incorporating all the details in one model. The requirements at the 3 different scales are completely different. And so it was an iterative process constantly. Now, but that was during the process, during the project. The real proof of the pudding lies actually now, afterwards. What's happening now? And I suppose part of the problems of having projects that's sort of even projects that's 3 years of length is that it starts and then it stops. And then there's a loss of continuity in it. And also then through that process, you also lose how it's actually been utilized by the client. And that's very hard to monitor and very hard to actually gauge going forward. Fortunately, because of the social networks that's been developed over the project, but also previously, one will be able to trace it informally. But a formal tracing thereof is very difficult to do. And I think it's really something that one needs to look into and to see how one can then get traction of this and taking it forward and improve it on a constant basis going forward.
Okay, thanks.
But I think so having the relationship on a project basis is inadequate. One actually requires an institutional relationship, where that institutional relationship is a long-term relationship that you then can make meaning of the model, of the results, and updating it and calibrating it as you go forward. But if it is linked to a specific project and project term, it is inadequate by far if you want to make meaning of it going forward.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else have a question? No? Okay, well, there's, who's that? Yeah, Nick, go ahead.
Just a quick question. So, I mean, this research very much focused, obviously, on the NRM model. Was there any focus on sort of alternative models? And with your costs, how is management costs incorporated? And is it just the management of the actual teams or broader management of the NRM program?
Okay, so 2 questions, and we spent 2 different answers to those 2 questions. In the database and the benefit cost analysis that I've shared, we've restricted ourselves to what has been published by and in the studies themselves. So, and kept the integrity of those publications intact. So if it says 100 Rand for management cost, we've taken it as 100 Rand for management cost. We haven't changed anything there to keep the integrity of those published papers intact. As for the models that Rozanne spoke of, given the extent and the engagements with working for water, the management cost up to chief director level has been included. So all of that cost up to chief director level has been included in calibrating those models that she spoke of, so that we can make sure that we don't omit those. Question is, third question that you've asked is strong focus on NRM. Yes, that's true. So there's a lot of focus on clearing of invasive alien plants. but there is a model in the wings that we are working on, where we're extending it also to other forms of degradation, not just clearing invasive alien plants, but also other forms of degradation, and obviously then also restoration, sort of as a positive offshoot of the work that has been done, because we've got that data and we've got that skill set now, and so on, that's been developed by the team. We're working on that to also then extend it to include other forms of degradation. I think I see Ryan's hand, Tony.
Yeah, Ryan, go ahead, please.
Hi, James. Thanks for a good talk. I've been following the progress on the websites. Just 2 quick questions. Based on the review, are you able to disaggregate the benefits to the restoration activities? I'm a feinboss ecologist, and it would be interesting to see which activities yield the best gains, or I think the results were presented collectively. And then secondly, did you manage to come up with a good costing model for clearing invasive alien plants? And is that available from your website? I've done some work with the management unit control plan tool. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And that requires a costing of clearing aliens, but it varies quite considerably. And I was just wondering if you had a fixed approach, or an approach to understanding your costing, or what you're getting into before you start. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so on the benefits side, so we have in the database the benefits that each study has quantified has been marked with a little X, and say, okay, so water has been valued, and biodiversity, and carbon, if that is the case. So the range of, or the set of the different benefits that have been quantified has been marked. But splitting thereof, and to say, well, let's say the quantum of the benefits are 100 Rand, splitting thereof in terms of, well, 50 is for water and 40 is for this and 10 is for that. No, we haven't split it in that detail. So we've got the quantum in the database, plus then marked it in terms of which services were valued by that specific paper, and not disaggregated it further. Then, but it would be possible, if you then are interested in, let's say, the water values, to look at all the papers that is linked to water, also by the map that I've shown, to then see what those different water values would be, if that is the one that interests you. From the costing side, the 2 approaches that we have followed. The one is the costing one for the benefit cost analysis, both the dynamic one and the static one that I've shown, where we stack religiously to the papers. As for the cost for the system dynamics that Rozanne spoke of, we have relied heavily on the databases that the department has provided us, so the WIMS database and all the data that is in there. We haven't tried to develop a new costing model other than what they have provided us for, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, James. I don't see any other hands, no other questions. We have run over our hour time slot, so we should probably wrap it up now. Yeah, no more questions. Okay, so thanks very much for your very informative talk, and definitely not something that we do much of at SAEON, but a nice example of actually putting economic value to the type of work that we do and how it could be done, or at least the results from what we do. Okay, so thanks everyone. We'll leave it there. Just a reminder that the next seminar is scheduled for next month. That's on the 4th, and that's going to be by Mkhulu Maseko. He's a student and he's working at the Grassland Wetland Forest Node on an hydrology MSc, and his talk will be on using new data in previously developed groundwater models. Does it work? Okay, thanks everyone, and hope to see you then. Bye.